Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the UK Government has descended into total farce. The Prime Minister has lost control of her Cabinet, of her party and of Parliament. What we witnessed in this House last night was nothing short of absolute chaos.
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, have you ever witnessed a Prime Minister whip her own party against her own motion? The Tory party truly is a shambles. More ministers resigning, a Prime Minister with no authority, a government incapable of governing. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has lost all control. The Prime Minister has lost a vote on her deal with the largest majority in parliamentary history. Lost a second time again with a near historic majority. Lost a vote on taking no deal off the table, and yet she tries to carry on as if nothing has happened. Apparently, we are to vote on her same deal again next week. For the Prime Minister, nothing has changed. The Prime Minister does not want a second EU referendum, and yet, Mr. Speaker, we are offered multiple votes on her deal. We are now on to the third. Not the best of three under her rules, because she only has to win once. We have to win every time to stop her Brexit madness. If the PM loses next week, does it become 4 or 5 or even more meaningful votes until Parliament does what she wants? The Prime Minister has to accept that she's out of time and accept reality. Her deal is a bad deal. No deal is a calamity. Mr. Speaker, this week the House of Lords placed an amendment to the trade bill to prevent a no-deal Brexit. This is a legislative instrument. The Government now must bring back the trade bill before the 29th of March. This is of crucial importance, and I expect the Minister to give an answer to that question in the summing up later this afternoon. The Prime Minister cannot stifle the legislative process to meet her party political interests. Accept the will of this House. You know, so much for parliamentary democracy. The Prime Minister ignores what she calls the sovereignty of Parliament, and her action is underlining that this truly is a constitutional crisis. Mr. Speaker, the only way out of the disaster is to put the decision on our EU membership back to the people. The people must take back control. Now, you know, I will in just a second, because we have a motion, an amendment in front of us this afternoon on a people's vote. Not our amendment, it's come from others. I didn't choose the timing, but the fact of the reality is that amendment is in front of us today. This House has got the first opportunity it has had, perhaps the only opportunity, to say on the basis of what we know, on the basis of what has changed since the referendum in 2016, that the people of the United Kingdom deserve to have a people's vote, that we all reflect on the reality that we know there is no such thing as a good Brexit, that we know that people are going to lose their job. On a day like today, Mr. Speaker, we expect the so-called official opposition to get behind that amendment. But you know what's happened? A shiver has run along the front benches of the Labour Party, looking for a spine to crawl up, and it hasn't been able to find one. And I'll say this, that the Labour Party will pay a price, and it's little wonder in Scotland that they've been found out for their behaviour over the last few years, working hand in glove with the Conservatives and Better Together to frustrate independence for Scotland. And here we find again today that the Labour Party are not prepared to stand up with the young people throughout the United Kingdom that are going to lose their rights to work and travel in 28 EU member states. And you know, I reflected a couple of days ago that the Prime Minister sat and laughed as we talked about that, and there is a man that I've had some respect for, the Labour Party Brexit spokesperson, that quite simply has flunked this opportunity. The Labour Party truly are a disgrace. And it is little surprise that they have fallen to third place in Scottish politics, and my goodness, they're going to stay there for a considerable period to come.
Does my honourable friend agree with me that if the Prime Minister can allow MPs to change their mind on Brexit, why can't she allow the people of the country to change their mind on Brexit?
Well, my honourable friend is quite correct. Apparently we're going to be coming back here to vote time after time after time to try and see if the Prime Minister can get a majority. Yet the reality is we know that she has a bad deal. And, you know, I shouldn't give you the opportunity to embarrass yourself because you do it countlessly, but on you go.
Well, I thank the right honourable member for giving way, and I'll do my best to not embarrass myself, speaking as a young person from Scotland on this issue. And I share the right honourable gentleman's support for a public vote. But what's critical, fundamentally, is maximising a majority in this House to secure it. And that will not happen today. It will not happen today because there will not be sufficient numbers. And what is critical is not agree with me. What's critical is also that if it were to pass, it would actually bomb out Amendment I in the name of the Right Honourable Member for Leeds Central and myself, which also would extend Article 50 and secure control of the order paper. That is the risk associated with that vexatious amendment that's been tabled today. We must wait. We must wait until it's at a time when it can be won.
Well, there we have it. Weasel words from the honourable member. I hope people in Glasgow see that, because when he's got the opportunity today to stand with the rest of us that want a people's vote, what does the member for Glasgow North East do, as the Labour Party has done year after year? He sells out the people of Scotland. And the people of Glasgow North East will extract a price from the honourable member when at the next election the SNP win back that seat for the people of Scotland.
At this point, I mean, I'll just say the honourable gentleman from Glasgow North East, whom I disagree with, by the way, is a friend of mine. But I do think it's a bit rich for Labour, and I include him in this, by the way, who have spent 2 years in a period of Herculean self-flagellation over a people's vote, to come to the House today as though there's some kind of voice of authority on the matter and seek to lecture these benches, or indeed the tigs up the back, on the issue of a people's vote. Doesn't he agree with me that for Labour, I only wish that they were as eloquent on their feet as they sometimes think they are?
Absolutely, and I would appeal to the Labour benches, and I'm looking at them. Show some responsibility. And yeah, you can wave, but this is serious. You should be coming through the lobbies with us tonight, or frankly, you'll be exposed for exactly what you are. That you've failed at this time of crisis to stand up for the people of Scotland. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to make some progress. Parliament has repeatedly rejected Theresa May's deal and leaving with no deal. Both these things must be respected. The Prime Minister, when we said to her no deal was acceptable, we meant it. Only a fresh referendum can now unblock things. The UK Government must now extend Article 50 and set into motion plans to hold a second EU referendum, with Remain on the ballot paper. Staying in the European Union is the best deal for all. It's what Scotland voted for, and it's the only way to protect jobs, living standards, our public services and the economy. Holding a second EU referendum is the best and most democratic way out of the impasse at Westminster. Westminster has failed, and the people now must and will have their say. Mr. Speaker, the SNP has laid an amendment today that would have got us out of this mess. Our amendment would have seen the Government move to agree an extension to Article 50 with the European Union to provide time to hold a second EU referendum. We know that the EU would consider an extension. Donald Tusk only this morning tweeted, "I will appeal to the EU 27 to be open to a long extension if the UK finds it necessary to rethink its Brexit strategy and build consensus around it." Mr. Speaker, there is the way out for everyone in this Parliament. Our amendment would have ensured that any second EU referendum would include an option to remain in the European Union. That is what is required. Members must recall the resolutions of the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly on the 5th of March 2019 that opposed the UK Government's exit deal and agreed that a no-deal outcome to the current negotiations on EU withdrawal would be completely unacceptable. This House must wake up to that reality and the democratic votes of the institutions of the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly. Members need to recognise that democracy means respecting the will of the people, but that means all of the people. And, Mr Speaker, Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain on that point. I will give way.
Here we go. I am puzzled at his the honourable member's desire for a third referendum. 2014 disrespected the outcome, 2016 disrespected the outcome. If we had a third referendum, would you respect that one? Would that be a change?
You know, Mr Speaker, it's quite remarkable, and I always love to hear from the Scottish Conservatives that temporarily have been sent to represent some constituents in Scotland. You know, the honourable member has to recognise that in 2014 we were told that if Scotland stayed in the United Kingdom, that our rights as EU citizens would be respected.
Guaranteed.
They were guaranteed by many members on the Conservative side. And what the honourable gentleman has to reflect on is that Scotland voted overwhelmingly to stay in the European Union, and yet we're being dragged out by this House. And the honourable gentleman and his friends have not stood up for their constituents in Scotland, every single local authority area. And the honourable gentleman and his friends have been tin-eared to the interests of the Scottish people. And yes, you can sit and laugh, but you have failed to stand up for your constituents. And that's been the case with every single Conservative Member of Parliament. And I will say this to the honourable gentleman, that we in the Scottish National Party are not prepared to sit back and to see ourselves dragged out of the European Union against our will. The people of Scotland are sovereign, and this House respected that sovereignty when it passed a motion on the claim of right last July. And the honourable gentleman, if he believes in democracy, should reflect on the fact that in the Scottish Parliament there is a majority for a referendum on Scottish independence. The Scottish Parliament voted by 69 votes to 59 to allow the Scottish Parliament to have a referendum. And I say to all honourable members that if the First Minister of Scotland, with the backing of the Scottish Parliament, does decide to give the people of Scotland that opportunity to secure our future as a European nation, then I would expect that this House would recognise the democracy and the position of the Scottish people, and will recognise that an independence referendum should, must and will take place.
Honourable gentleman for giving way. If he is so confident in the views of the Scottish people that they want a second independence referendum, why does he not suggest to his colleague, the First Minister of Scotland, to call an early Scottish parliamentary election, stand on a clear and explicit call for a second independence referendum and put it to the test? Because the Scottish Conservative Party are ready to go and will take you on and will prove that the Scottish people do not want a second independence referendum.
You know, Mr Speaker, talk about bravado. We have a mandate from the people of Scotland, and what we're asking is that the Conservatives, if they are Democrats, that they recognise that right of Scotland to determine its own future. And we're going to find that what's happening in this situation. I will give way on that point.
I'm hearing calls from Conservatives for an election. If there was an election, I wonder if those self-same Conservatives would accept that election being fought on independence, and the SNP in a majority of seats, we would move to independence on that basis, as Margaret Thatcher said, even without a referendum.
You know, what I would say to him,
before the right honourable gentleman responds to his honourable friend, point of order to Hugo Swire.
Well, guidance, Mr Speaker. Interesting and diverting though it is to listen to the internal wranglings of the Scottish independence argument, would it be possible perhaps to persuade the SNP spokesman to remember what this debate is meant to be about this afternoon?
Mr. Order, Mr. Newlands, calm yourself. You're usually a an unassuming gentleman. You seem to be getting quite carried away. I accept the thrust of what the right honourable gentleman has just said. I think that the criticism applies, frankly, to members on both sides. A certain tribalism is in danger of enveloping the House, but we must focus on the substance of the debate, and there isn't that long. Mr. Ian Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, although I may say that all I've been doing is responding to interventions from the government side. Mr. Speaker, as I was saying, 62% of Scotland voted to remain, every single Scottish local authority area. So if the UK government, indeed if the opposition, believes that Scotland is an equal partner, it's time they showed respect to the will of the Scottish people. Mr. Speaker, Scotland will not be taken out of the European Union against its will. And you know, time and time again, the SNP and our government in Edinburgh has sought to achieve compromise. We have suggested solution after solution to protect the interests of citizens in Scotland and across the UK. And you know, that issue about lack of respect is just amply shown. And I can see the member from Berwick laughing away. The Scottish Government issued a paper, Scotland's Place in Europe, in December 2016, with contributions from a wide number of experts across the land. And the UK Government couldn't even be bothered to respond. That's the lack of respect, which is demonstrated once again by the Conservative benches this afternoon. And I hope the people of Scotland reflect on that, because, quite frankly, you do yourselves the most disservice. Mr. Speaker, this government would not listen. This Prime Minister and the Tory party only care about the interests of England. You know, they talk about nationalists and separatists. The real separatists, they sit on the benches. The Prime Minister and the Tory party don't care about Scotland's interest, and the truth is, so does neither the Leader of the Opposition. Neither the Tories nor Labour give a toss about Scotland. Just look at the polls. Earlier this week, we saw Westminster voting intention for the SNP up 4%, Conservatives down 3%, and the Labour down 3%. Even so-called Scottish Tory MPs went through the lobby last night to keep no deal on the table. They ignored the wishes of the Scottish people. They voted to leave with no deal on the table and the chaos that would ensue. They voted to put leave on the table with the prospect of shortage of medicines. It is the case, Mr. Speaker, that the Scottish Tories come with a health warning. They risk damaging the health of the people of Scotland. And that is true after months and months of ignoring the voices of the people of Scotland, after years of showing nothing but contempt for our government, our Parliament and our people. I urge MPs across this House. I look to the Scottish Tories and to the Scottish Labour MPs. Do you stand with Scotland? Will you stand up for Scotland's national interests, or will you instead stand for your narrow party interests only? I appeal to you. The time has come to put party aside. And, you know, people will be watching this and reading Hansard, and what do we get? We get laughter from the government bench. That's what Scotland gets. Not being taken seriously, being laughed at, not so much as an afterthought.
Where's your respect agenda?
Mr. Speaker, the time has come to do what is right, what is necessary. You are duty-bound by the people of Scotland to stand up for their interests, and do that by standing with the SNP. Now, what about the Secretary of State for Scotland, abstaining on an issue as critical of removing no deal, standing on the sidelines as Scottish jobs are threatened? He ought to have resigned by now, but this really is the last straw. If he had any shred of dignity and any possible remorse after having failed again to stand up for Scotland, then he should do the right thing. He should resign.
He's good at threatening that.
I'll give way one last time.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for giving way during his speech. He has to be very careful he doesn't tar everyone with the same brush. But can I just say to the honourable gentleman this? When I wrote to the First Minister of Scotland in July of last year to ask her if her and the SNP would support a people's vote, she wrote back to me and said no. So I'm glad that come late October the SNP did support a public vote, and I'm glad that we will be voting likewise on that. But can he confirm to the House? Can he confirm to the House? Can he confirm to the House? It's funny, I still get barracked even when I agree with the honourable gentleman, but can he confirm to the House that his support for a public vote is completely and totally unconditional and doesn't include a condition of holding an independence referendum?
You know, I'm genuinely fond of the honourable gentleman, but you know, I have to say to him, if he wants to write to someone to ask if a leader is going to support a people's vote, he should be writing to his own leader. Because the fact of the matter is, I can tell him that every single SNP MP is going to be going through the lobby today to vote for a people's vote, and I say to him, come and join us. Come and join us. And you'll be very welcome in doing that. And I would applaud him for doing that. Mr. Speaker, the way Scotland has been ignored through the Brexit process means the case for independence is now stronger than it ever has been. I respect that our amendment hasn't been taken today, but if it had been taken, it was the best way to protect the will of the Scottish people. It was to stop Scotland being dragged out of the EU against our will. This can be best avoided by the people of Scotland exercising their sovereign right to choose their own constitutional future as a full, equal, sovereign, independent member state of the European Union. Mr. Speaker, we did not ask for this Brexit crisis. The people of Scotland do not want this chaos. The damage and destruction caused to British politics has been the fault of Conservatives and Labour alone. Make no mistake, the UK is facing a constitutional crisis. Decades of neglect by consecutive Labour and Conservative governments have seen our people let down, have seen the economy grow weaker and smaller, wages stagnate, communities divided, public services on their knees. Mr. Speaker, this is broken Britain. The cracks appeared before Brexit, but Westminster has failed to fill them in. Now, Britain is shattering. Divisions are deepened, politically and socially. This is not a union that we want to be part of. I look to our work in Scotland, how devolution has developed our society, how our Scottish Government has built up our communities and broken down barriers, where our constituents get free education and free prescriptions, where our children get the best start in life, regardless of their family circumstances, where our society looks out to the world, where, Mr. Speaker, we welcome EU nationals to become part of our communities.
Absolutely. I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. I know he's commented previously on the government's abject failure to seek any kind of cross-house consensus in almost 3 years since the referendum. I don't know whether he's aware that as recently as the 22nd of February this year, the Irish Government introduced an omnibus bill consisting of no fewer than 15 pieces of legislation across 9 government departments. Yesterday, 3 weeks later, it was unanimously approved by the Irish Senate with cross-party support. Is that an example of what might have been achieved in this place if we'd had a government that was willing to follow the example of our friends and relatives across the Irish Sea?
A good point. And, you know, when the Prime Minister called the election and lost the majority, you would have thought that she would have reflected on the fact that minority government meant that she needed to work with other parties, that she had to build a consensus. And yet all that time has been lost. Mr. Speaker, the choice is clear. Scotland is already a fairer, a healthier, a happier nation. We feel closely bound to our historic bonds with Europe. We in the SNP will fight to keep Scotland moving forward. We will not be dragged down by the narrowness of Westminster. We want to build an independent nation, a nation that welcomes everyone, that works for everyone, that believes an opportunities should be for everyone. Brexit will not stop Scotland.
I'm sorry to inform the House that with immediate effect